Hello and welcome to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging field of data science. We bring the best minds in data, software engineering, machine learning and artificial intelligence. Now here are your hosts, Lavinia and Andy Leonard.
Hello and welcome to Data Driven. This is a podcast that we talk about what's going on in technology. Now, as we all know, technology is ever changing. But there's something unique going on that's going to impact everyone on the planet. The rise of data analytics and data science. The rise of cheap cloud-based data storage and analytics is literally changing the game and making data science more accessible. Data is being collected at an ever-increasing pace. The companies and organizations that will prevail in the age of big data are going to be those who can process, analyze, and find insights before their competition does. The focus of this podcast will be among the greatest names, concepts, and ideas in data and data science, and discovering how the world is becoming data-driven. With me on this journey is Andy Leonard. Andy Leonard is a data philosopher at Enterprise Data and Analytics, an SSIS trainer, consultant, and developer of the Data Integration Lifecycle Management Suite, a business intelligence markup language developer, and a BIML hero. SQL Server database and data warehouse developer, community mentor engineer, and a farmer. He's co-author of SQL Server Integration Services Design Patterns and The Stairway to Integration Services. Hello, Andy.
Hi, Frank. With me today is Frank Lavinia, who you just heard with that warm introduction, for which I thank you, Frank. Frank Lavinia is an accomplished computer scientist, author, software developer, and technology enthusiast. Frank publishes developments in issues like the Internet of Things, civics technology, and the DC tech scene on his website, franksworld.com. You can find his how-to tutorials, technology news, and latest projects on this site and his social media channels. Frank most recently served as a technology and civic engagement evangelist at Microsoft. In this role, he demonstrated Microsoft technology to a broad array of political and civic leaders, engaging in dynamic presentations ranging from the use of open data in civic technology projects to Microsoft's suite of software applications. Prior to his role in civic technology, Frank worked as a developer evangelist for Microsoft, where he served at the intersection of the education and startup communities. Frank has extensive experience in web and application development. He is also an expert in mobile and tablet engineering. A New York City native, Frank received his degree in computer science from Fordham University. You can find him on Twitter at @tabletier. Welcome, Frank.
Thanks for that introduction, Andy. And this podcast, this is basically kind of the philosophy of this podcast. If data is the new oil, then data analytics are the new refineries, apps are the new gas stations, and you're basically listening to Car Talk. What do you think about that, Andy?
I think that's a great analogy, Frank, all around. Those are fantastic analogies. And, I completely agree that data is the new oil. And analytics are the new refineries. It's very interesting to see the tools and the technologies evolving and growing, and it's all happening right before our eyes here in early 2017.
Absolutely, and it's happening at a rate that I haven't seen things grow this fast in quite some time. It's quite amazing if you think about it. I mean, machine learning was kind of a blip on the radar in 2015. And last year, just this cascade of just innovation, acquisitions from Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. And if you drive down from SFO to Silicon Valley, every other sign, billboard, maybe more, mentions some kind of artificial intelligence or data research. It's an interesting time to be in this field. So that's probably, you've been a database guy for quite some time. And now you're a data philosopher. Could you talk about that and Do you wear a toga, or a beret, and sip coffee and cappuccino on the streets of Paris?
Definitely a yes on the coffee, Frank. And I have been to Paris once. I can't remember if I had tea or coffee while I was there, but it was a very interesting trip, very surreal for me because I never imagined I'd ever get to go there physically. Um, Data philosophy, in my opinion, is really more, or I'll say different, not more than data science, but it's different from data science in this way. As you know, I've done a lot of work in databases, and you mentioned that earlier. I focused on business intelligence, and before that, decision support systems. And a lot of the same technology has just been rebranded as we've gone from the 90s into the double aughts and now into the 20 teens. And we saw this evolution happen. But I completely agree with what you said earlier about the acceleration of data science, specifically in the past 18 months. And I should mention, we're recording this in the first quarter of 2017. Um, the difference that I see between data science and data philosophy is that I'm more concerned with the truth, I think, than I am about running a ton of experiments. But the catch is, in order to do data philosophy, in order to find the truth, I do have to do data science. I do have to execute a bunch of experiments and then examine and weigh the data that comes out of that. And I think people, tell me what you think of this statement, Frank. I think a lot of people see data science as being more exact than it truly is. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I should probably mention that I'm working through the edX certification that Microsoft has on data science, as you are. I'm a few classes further ahead, not because I'm smarter or anything. It's just because I started earlier.
You are smart.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to think that, but you are quite brilliant yourself. The interesting thing is when you study statistics, and that's I think a core part of data science is understanding statistics and its practical applications.
Absolutely.
You can't isolate data science and statistics, statistics is not an exact science; it's exact-ish.
Right.
And I think it's an illusion. And every time you turn on the news or whatever, they talk about this study, that study. There's a lot that I've learned in statistics that, you really have to question kind of some of the basic assumptions that they make. And for lack of a better term, a lot of those, study results are clickbait.
Right.
The titles certainly are, if you do this, then X will happen, or,
Right.
if X, then Y. It's like, oh, you know what? Correlation is not causation. I think that's what I've taken away the most from so far of these classes. A lot of the other stuff that are in the data science things are kind of things that I knew how to work with Excel or in SQL. And but the real kind of key, the aha moments I've had has been all the statistics classes, which I actually never took in college, and I'd always heard people that had taken statistics, hate it. But, I guess I'm one of that weird 1% that I actually kind of like it.
Well, I could see you liking statistics, and especially I would think, knowing you for the past 10 years or so, that I think the visualizations would appeal to you. You're a very graphics oriented person, very visual person, visual thinker. And I've seen some of the visualizations you've created even in the past. And I would, maybe I'm presuming or assuming, but I would think that part of it would be very appealing to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And my one of the things that really clued me onto data science is that I'm a software developer. I'm a software engineer at heart, and that's not going to change. But and software engineers tend to want to shy away from the data side of things. Sure, we'll come up with the models, but when it actually gets stored into the database, we think of that as an operations problem. And
Right.
we've always, at least speaking for me, and I know I'm not alone in this, is that I've always tried to avoid kind of going down the data path, because once you step down that path, forever will it dominate your destiny. But it just seemed like it was just a direction in my career I didn't want to go, which one is it's short-sighted in some ways, because when you have a web page, or dare I say a Silverlight app, because that once was a thing. Whenever you saved your data, ultimately it hit a database of some kind, whether it's Ruby, whether it's, Java, Node.js, it hits some kind of data store. Right. And any good developer has to know their way around a relational model, at least understand it. They don't have to know how to crack open, Toad or SQL Server Management Studio and start writing queries. But they at least have to have an appreciation for kind of what actually happens when you hit your REST-based service that ultimately, loads a database with your material. That is important. And I was actually lucky because my university was all our professors were basically ex-IBM people.
Wow.
And this is in the, I'll date myself, this is in the 90s, early 90s. A lot of them had worked literally side by side with I'm going to mess up their names, but it's Cod and Date on DB2, kind of that relational theory stuff. Wow. And I took a database class taught by one of his former coworkers.
Oh, wow.
And and jokingly he would say, well, this guy owes me like $10 still because of a Super Bowl bet or something like that. Like it was like, not that they just know them, but they kind of like knew them personally. So I thought that was awesome because you're not getting it straight from the source, but you're getting it pretty close.
Absolutely.
And those classes, I thought they were interesting, and I never really appreciated how rich my education was in database technology until I worked professionally. When I would work with other developers, and keep in mind, early in my career, it was the mid-90s. So, if you could spell HTML, you had a job. And kind of seeing kind of like the people who were, who went to the Jedi Academy and actually got a computer science degree versus people, and this is not a knock at people who didn't go to university or whatever. I mean, it's kind of like, I was fortunate enough to kind of have a full breadth view of everything from kind of the philosophy side. That's why I love your title. And kind of the practical engineering side of it. So I don't know, and I've always tried to avoid that because in practice, I've always saw the DBAs, the only correct path for kind of someone in that data world was to be a DBA. And I didn't want to be that guy wearing a pager, and being paged if, the tables, the hard drive crashed or whatever. Right. But one of the things that's happened over the last few years is as I switched from kind of being a developer evangelist to a technology evangelist, one of the cool things about my last role at Microsoft was I would present to elected officials, visiting dignitaries, and, they don't care about, hey, look, you can make a, XAML control do this. Look, it spins, yay, in 3D space. You should have to developers, it's all ooh and ah, but, policymakers, they don't care about that. They care about, I'll take the cynical route. They want to be reelected, right? In order to do that, they want ways that they can kind of crunch information and have situational awareness. And with all the data that's being collected in the world, they have access to all that data, but they don't necessarily use it. And, when you show them that, hey, look, you can take open government data sets about, weather or 311 calls and 911 calls, and you can kind of mash that up and you can see a visualization of trends over time. If you have a major city in your congressional district and you notice, hey, look, there's a spike in this type of crime, right. It's better to one of the lobbyists I worked with basically said they want to be able to drive the headlines rather than be driven by the headlines. None of those guys and gals want to be sideswiped with kind of like, shocking news. So this gives them the opportunity to kind of be ahead of the curve. And not just that, but present their ideas based on data in a way that's very clear and easily consumable for their peers and their constituents.
That whole segment, Frank, describing your career and your education and your experiences in those jobs, what a great application of data science. You were doing it before you realized, I think, you were doing data science. And I think I was in that same boat. Back in the old days, you mentioned your you'd heard that nobody who took statistics liked it. I was fortunate in that I never heard that. And my education in statistics actually came through manufacturing. So I have an associate's degree in electronics engineering, and I cut my teeth on statistics working as initially as a plant electrician, and then later as an engineer. And um, you mentioned you were very fortunate to have instructors there who were ex-IBM people who knew COD and who knew the other folks. They're the big names. My instructor on applied statistics and statistical process control, he learned it from W. Edwards Deming.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, so we're kind of in the same boat there, except I didn't have that natural aversion to it. I hadn't been schooled yet on how bad statistics was. So I didn't know any better. I enjoyed it. I liked math, all my life. I've enjoyed math. And, or I may, if anyone's listening in Europe, I should say maths or Australia. It's probably everywhere but the US, but you know
Right.
what I mean.
Well, you didn't
Really,
know you were supposed to hate broccoli,
well, that's true, right? But
you know?
I enjoyed the statistics part of it. I enjoyed the application of it, and it was a very practical application of statistics. And Frank, you and I have had this conversation before offline, where we talk about yeah, and we disparage a little bit the way math is taught, especially in the U.S., where it's very divorced from the science part of it, and that's just tragic. I mean, how else can you learn calculus without learning physics? Because calculus was invented for physics. And when you start thinking about statistics and and learning it in a place like a manufacturing facility where quality is a very big deal, where it can make or break your profit margin, and things like that. It was a great way to learn it. So when Six Sigma was becoming popular in manufacturing, and I'll date myself, this was in the late '80s when I got into that role. It was I was able to get in and learn a lot of it that way, and learning it from Dr. Deakins, who was my instructor on that, and I really enjoyed that. Um, Kind of, when I jumped the fence and became a software developer, and I did for a while before I became a data person, the my hobby became my job, and really enjoyed that. And I moved into the IT department of a manufacturing plant. That's how I kind of made the jump. Became a certified MCSD back before .NET, and then a job came open writing reports, which was kind of what I was doing in the pre.NET Microsoft world before. And so that happened. I was already there. That's what I was building in manufacturing, was reports. And Frank, the more I hear of our backgrounds, the more I realize that we were both doing data science before it was called data science.
No, absolutely. And as quote unquote, you can't see the air quotes on a podcast, but as new as this field is, it's not really new.
Right.
It's a lot of this is I don't want to say repackaging and mashing up, but I mean it kind of is. I mean,
Some of it, yeah.
I mean it's kind of like, I'll use a musical analogy, right? Electronic dance music and like electronica, is that a remix of disco from the 70s? Well, kind of, but not really.
Right.
And I think we're really going all over the map with the analogies here, because
Sure.
no one, it's interesting because if you ask 10 different people what exactly data science is, you're going to get at least 10, maybe 11 different answers.
I was going to say
And
10 plus or minus 3.
10 plus or minus 3. Yes. Yeah. I forgot about the standard error. But I mean, clearly, and it's interesting because, as I look into this, there's not even, there might be now, and if there is, it's very new. It's a PhD program in data science.
Right.
And a lot of universities are kind of coming up with master's levels and certificates, and there's massively online courses devoted towards that, and it's interesting because the curriculums haven't really been settled, right? I mean, if you study
Right.
math, I mean that path is centuries old. Computer science is probably maybe a few decades old in
Right.
terms of what you would expect reasonably. And there's actually, and this kind of shocked me, is that there was a debate, and I blogged about it on Frank's World, and I'll put it on the show notes. There was a debate about, should statistics be taught in data science curriculum. And my reaction was, how could you not at least touch upon it?
Yeah.
You don't have to be like, PhD level statistics.
Right.
But at least, have an intro level to it.
Sure.
And I thought that was interesting that's even a debate.
Yeah, that's crazy. I hadn't heard that.
No, so I think what we're seeing is even academia is struggling to get their hands around what exactly is data science. Right. And the only ones that really kind of, quote unquote, know what data science is are the startups or the social media companies, the Twitters, the Microsofts, the Facebooks, the Amazons. I think they're the ones that are actually defining kind of what the curriculum should be, because they're using it, very seriously. And,
yeah.
It's an interesting time to be in an industry where, and it was kind of like the web in its early days. What's a web developer look like? Well, they're kind of like a regular developer, but they're not, because they have to know a little bit of design.
Right.
This is before you had the luxury of specialization. And right. I think there's we're gonna hit that. In fact, I saw a Venn diagram today that it showed kind of the three different fields: data architect, data engineer, and data scientist, and how those worlds kind of they touch. And then some of it, if you combine two of them, then you're this type of data person, and if you combine two of the three, then you're that kind. So I think we're starting to see kind of the you're a farmer, so I'll use the analogy of a farmer. When the little buds come out of the ground, it starts off usually as one stem, and then it starts splitting up into different branches. And I think we're that early in this evolution that's what's happening.
I completely agree with that analogy, Frank. And what I'm seeing too in this field is very organic, and it may be because I do farm, and I'm holding that hammer, and everything looks like a nail. Not really sure. But it is. Evolution is a good term for it. I think describing it as organic is a good term for it. And we're starting to see tons of little applications pop up here and there. We're starting to see the beginnings, I believe, of automation. Some of it's farther along, more mature than some of the other tools for automation, but it's growing. We're starting to see not just automation and this organic growth, but we're starting to see what I'd call aggregation or amalgamation with things like R showing up in SQL Server 2016, and even SQL Server 2016 running on Linux. We're right. Starting to see all of this cross-pollination happening. I mean, another organic term, if you will, and this whole field as a result of it is, I think that's fueling a lot of the growth that we're seeing. When I say growth, just in the amount of data science that's being applied, but also the tools available to apply it and how they're being used with each other.
No, absolutely, and it shows you that you can tell that there's a tidal wave coming, in terms of this, because the thought of SQL Server on Linux, the thought of R, which is, if you're not familiar with it, is a language that's basically ideally suited for kind of analysis and statistical processing. The thought of that being on Linux is just mind-blowing. That's dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
It was a joke. 7-8 years ago, Steve Jones, who is the senior editor at SQL Server Central, always writes an April Fool's editorial that announces something crazy happened. That was one of the topics about 7 or 8 years ago. SQL Server's announced it's going to run on Linux. So,
that's funny. That also speaks to kind of the changes in Microsoft that have been going on in the last 5 years. If you, I was at Build last year, and the everything at that Build versus the Build 5 years prior to it, which would have been the first one. The joke that a lot of us were kind of pondering on the trade floor was, you imagine if someone was in a coma for 5 years, they went to the first build, and then they woke up and they went to this build.
Wow. Yeah.
You would just not think that they would just think they woke up in some kind of parallel dimension.
Yeah, it's bizarro, right?
Right. Bizarro. It's good. I think a lot of the changes have been, head and shoulders what's been needed to be done. But, we're seeing kind of even the big kind of companies that, unsilo themselves because they know that the next the wave of the next 10 years is going to be around data science. Is it going to be called data science? Who knows? It's going to be around IoT, machine learning, artificial intelligence. All of these things are interrelated in kind of this web of, not the web, but a web of, you source the data from your IoT and sensors, and then you can do predictive analytics on it. And then ultimately you can build smarter systems and, power an AI, because you're going to train the AI based on that data. You're going to do analytics based on that data.
Yeah.
It seems that, the core of, even with the advance of solar and alternative energies, the world economy essentially runs on oil.
Right.
And I think data is, that is an apt analogy, that data is the new oil.
I got to agree with you, Frank. I mean, you see it all over. And people who are adept in these fields and in these technologies, especially now in early 2017, this is a really good time to be diving in because things are fluid. They're changing so quickly that, you may feel like approaching the topic that there's just no way. How do I catch up? How do I start? Well, one good way is the certification you and I mentioned, that edX certification at Microsoft. There are
Right.
others out there. Coursera has a course on data science. And when you complete that course, you'll receive a certificate, and hopefully you will have learned enough where you can go and begin applying data science to business problems. Folks will pay you to do that. I mean, it reminds me a little bit from a certification point of view of the early days of the Microsoft certified engineer, where if you held that certification early on, you were walking into well-paying jobs. I mean, top technology jobs in enterprises. Now later, that particular certification became kind of a game, and a lot of people were setting up boot camps, and you would go for the weekend or a week, and you'd get to take the test until you passed it, and that sort of stuff. And it became more of a paper certification. The course that you and I are taking, the edX course through the Microsoft Data Science curriculum, that's definitely not one of those courses. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure Coursera has similar requirements in their curriculum where you have to produce a project at the end, and it's graded. It's not popped through a machine looking at where you dotted the multiple choice answers, where you darkened the circles. It's not that at all. It's a person looking at it and evaluating, does this person know enough to be called a scientist and be certified with this certification?
Right, and I think the Microsoft and the industry as a whole has realized, because it wasn't just Microsoft. You mentioned a Microsoft engineering certificate, but I mean, I know Novell Networks had their CNA, and that
Right.
they had paper CNAs that kind of
Right.
you just show up and
I
kind of
wasn't
memorize.
wasn't trying to pick on Microsoft there and single them out, but yeah,
Right,
a
but I
lot
mean,
of
yeah.
it's
So I mean,
paper trails.
I think those type of organizations, the certification organizations, I like to think they've learned from their past mistakes, and what we're
Yeah.
seeing is kind of a new innovation in that space, and a lot of these things are coming up because academia is a slow bureaucratic process,
Right.
so you're seeing a lot of private companies kind of put these together. There's Udacity has a
Yep.
nano degree program, not just in data science but in other things too,
Right.
because the pace of innovation is, historically, the innovation was done at the universities,
Right.
but their time cycle has not changed. But you look at the startup world. I mean, 10 years ago, who was Facebook?
Right.
Twitter. Who were they 10 years ago?
Right. Right.
And all the big names that we see kind of every day weren't really big names if they even existed at all. I mean, Snapchat, I don't know when they were founded, but they certainly weren't around 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that there's such a plethora of data. I mean, the statistic that I would always throw out at the start of my presentation to these political types was, 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years.
Right.
And, that rate is accelerating because I remember hearing, 90% of the world's data was created in the last 5 years. And then before that, it was 10 years.
Right.
So at some point, we're going to say, 90% of the world's data was created today.
Wow.
I'm sure at some point it'll level off, but, we're really looking at data is going to keep coming and coming and coming and coming. And while you're right, I mean, some of this will be automated. I don't think the artificial intelligence or machine learning technology is going to get up to the task where it's going to completely robots will take over data science. I think we're some years away from that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to say where this ends. And for me, I started playing around with a Motorola 6800 processor back in 1975. For you kids, that's back when years began with a 1. And and we used to carve our own chips out of wood. I mean, it was desperate times back then.
And you had to walk uphill in the snow both ways.
Both ways barefoot, yeah,
wow.
To get to the 6800, yeah.
Wow.
It was
fun fact. That was the same chip family in the Macintoshes in the 90s and 80s.
Yep.
Also was the chip inside the Sega Genesis system for all you retro gamers out there.
There you go. And if you were into manufacturing technology, as I was, and still am as much as I can. I love that field. It was the controller that was used in the Allen Bradley programmable logic controllers, the PLCs that ran factories. So a lot of the stuff that we wear and probably a lot of the stuff that we consume has been touched by that technology. That Motorola technology has been around for a while. But what was neat, kind of having that experience, and having done this now for almost 42 years, been in technology. It's kind of seeing it go through these generational changes and watching these cycles of that are some similar cycles in the way technology evolves, in the way computers talk to each other, in the way we exchange information. And I tell my kids all the time, in my book, I'm living in Star Trek land on some levels, based on where I was 42 years ago, and where we saw, we just saw it was just we bought bytes of RAM, okay?
Right.
Not kilobytes, not megabytes, not gigabytes, bytes. So,
right, and it wasn't just you couldn't just go to Office Depot or Staples and pick up these things. I mean,
goodness knows. There was soldering involved.
There was what?
There was soldering involved.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it's interesting that I still have my first computer, a Commodore 64.
Yeah, that's a great box.
And I mean that 64K, and I remember when that was a big deal. And I have Word documents that are 65K that just say hello. I mean, the show notes document for this episode is probably going to be about 100K.
Right.
And we don't think about it anymore. And it's interesting how we've come so far so fast. And,
well, sure. Well, Frank, mentioning soldering, right, made me think about you do a lot with IoT, and you post a lot of stuff on your websites about the IoT projects, and now you're back to soldering again. So that's one more of those cycles now that's kind of made its way back around. When I started, we had to solder, and now that you're doing IoT stuff and maker stuff, you're soldering again.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about the old days when you had a VT102 terminal, and for you kids in the audience, just Google it. There's a pretty good article on Wikipedia about it.
Those had both colors, right? It was light and dark green, right?
It was, yeah, or if you were really fancy, you had a university lab that had amber terminals as well as or green terminals. So depending on if you what you preferred. And when we would complain, the funny thing is when I took computer science, and I graduated in '95. So if you want to figure out my age, go ahead. Whenever we would complain about how hard our assignments were, our computer science professors would always do the whole, talk to me about punch cards, and then tell me how bad you have it. And
Back in my day.
back in my day. But I mean, it was pretty interesting. And in the computer lab, there was actually one or two of the old terminals that, I don't know what they're called, but basically instead of a screen, it would print something out on a dot matrix printer.
Wow.
And, that was just, I just couldn't imagine that,
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, if you think about kind of cloud computing and kind of our smart devices versus our, that in a sense you kind of have, low powered devices everywhere that talk to more powerful computers sitting somewhere else.
Yeah.
Sounds a lot like the mainframe days.
It certainly does. Or N tier, right?
Or N tier, yeah. I mean, a lot of these things they kind of repeat because those were good ideas then, and I think a lot of the are good ideas now. They're just adapted. Now I happen to have my iPhone is a VT102 terminal with really great graphics. If you want to think of it that way, and I think it applies, and. We live in exciting times, and I know everyone says that it's always been an exciting time to be in IT because certainly the pace of innovation has been crazy. But if you really think about what's going on, I mean, just in the last 18 months, just with data science, I mean, it's been phenomenal.
Agreed.
I was talking to a company a few months ago, and they made a big deal about how they have, I think, a 45 terabyte database, and I'm thinking to myself, in 2006, that would have been a big deal.
Right.
But in at the time it was 2016.
Right.
I mean, a kid could create, could literally solder something that collects data, and then push that up through some kind of, cloud engine, whether it was Azure or Amazon, and create a could create a database that large potentially. Now they might have an interesting conversation with their parents about, what's the charge on the credit card bill. But I mean, it could be done. So I mean, the cloud has really enabled kind of that level of expertise to be really focused in one or two, maybe three companies, and make it accessible to everyone.
And I expect that to grow. I expect the economics to continue to drive the cost down of being able to do store more and more data. And I refer to that, Frank. I used to talk about velocity, but what I've seen the past 18 months with data science has really made me start talking more about acceleration. And that's what I'm seeing. There's no line here, brother. This is curved, and it just keeps building and building and building. And not only that, but the rate of acceleration, I think, is also accelerating. So, it's just getting. I don't want to say crazy because I don't want to put it in a bad light. Although I'm sure somebody somewhere, probably someone who lives closer to you than me, is probably using this for nefarious purposes. But think of the good. Look at all of the good. And when you start putting all of this together with the advances in visualization technology, I was speaking a couple of weeks ago with my editor at A-Press, a gentleman named Jonathan Gennick. And Jonathan lives in, I think he lives in Minnesota, but he loves going to his office, the A-Press office in New York, because he schedules all of these meetings. He'll do a lunch meeting, and he'll do a before work and an after work meeting. And he just finds people who are doing neat stuff in technology. And some of the articles that you and I have liked on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter recently, he's gone to meet some of those folks. And they're doing things with the HoloLens and with augmented reality where, just from a medical perspective, they're now able to teach students medical data, medical professional stuff. And they put on a HoloLens and they're able to walk around inside of a large representation of a heart.
Wow.
Or a brain. And it's, what I see happening I'm a sci-fi fan. I have been forever, and I particularly like novels that are multi-book series. What I'm noticing is the gap between what we see in special effects and the movies and what is becoming real. That time gap, Frank, is shrinking, ever shrinking. And
Absolutely.
that's accelerating. So, you think about one of the Avengers movies where they had the Age of Ultron, where they had the brains up, the brain maps,
Hmm.
uh, projecting. We can do that today. What has it been? 2 years since that movie came out, maybe
Yeah.
three. We can now do that. The only difference is they weren't wearing the HoloLens, right?
Right.
So, who cares if you,
I
as
want one of
long
those
as
Iron Man suits, though. That would
well,
be cool.
I doubt, that would be awesome. I kind of, I like Vision because he can also wield Mjolnir, but hey,
Yeah.
we,
I
we
think
don't
we
want to go
secured
too
our
far.
geek cred on this
Exactly, that's
episode.
right. Hey, I remember the back, and you do too. The only way to keep up with that, you had to read.
Right,
It
right.
wasn't watching television or watching a movie. That wasn't available. They were only in the comic books, man. And
And you had to go to
I,
the comic book store with
yeah,
the Simpsons character, the comic book store guy is um,
that is
definitely. I'll
that's
use.
disturbingly accurate, isn't it?
Yes, I would say he is definitely represents the mean. Um, Using a statistics term.
Well, that's
Um,
great, Frank. Now we're not going to get any comic books sponsors now.
no, I like it. Comic books are, and we're really going off the trail here,
Mhm.
are an underappreciated art form.
Agreed.
You think about the
Graphic
writing
novels.
that goes into it, the
Yeah,
graphic novels too. I think
yeah,
as a society here, and I think in Japan, I think they've been appreciated for many, many years. But I think here in the United States, I think they're finally getting the appreciation that's due to them.
absolutely. And like I said, the stuff we saw in those books when we were kids, and then
Right.
that have been made into movies now with this fantastic, graphics that they're able to do. That stuff's coming to life in 2016, 2017, and it's just amazing what they can do with that. And we had this conversation with a guest, I won't say who because I don't want to ruin the show for you,
Mhm.
where we were talking about, everybody kind of looked at virtual reality and thought about applying it to business intelligence and statistics and especially visualizations, but nobody saw augmented reality coming. And
No.
that came out of nowhere in what, late 2015. And
Yeah.
oh my gosh, that's the thing, where
Right.
you can
And
look at someone and maybe see their, I don't know, their Twitter follower count or something like that. That's where we're going with this.
absolutely. Or if you forget, if you're the ones that can't, always forget people's names right after you meet them, boom, you
Oh,
can.
I'm there.
I mean that's a real problem, and I think it's interesting too because you mentioned special effects, and if you look at Frank's World TV, I have a thing for kind of After Effects and things like that. And a lot of this is just amazing about the time we live in, is that a lot of the tools that you see used in Hollywood are also available for the average person at home to be able to use them.
Isn't that wild?
I mean, it's just crazy. We live in times of unprecedented access to the same tools that professionals have,
I
and
know.
and I think that speaks to the acceleration you're seeing is that innovation will beget innovation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Neural networks as a concept not really that new, but it was never really accessible to the average person,
Right.
and now it is. And the unintended consequences of that, who knows?
Yeah, and the innovations that's taking place, like who would have thought of running neural networks on graphics processors?
Right,
You
right, or
know?
why? And it's just kind of like, oh, well, that makes sense,
Yeah, it
um,
does. Yeah,
because it's used to handling a lot of data and processing it in parallel.
absolutely. Yeah,
And for the graphics companies, it's certainly a boon for them because there's only so many hardcore gamers that are going to go out there and buy those crazy graphics cards.
right,
But now, they'll get an order from a cloud service company that will order 10,000 of them at a time.
right,
Um,
right.
and that certainly gives them money to do their innovation and research. So we
Absolutely. Yeah,
definitely, I think the theme for this show is going to be we live in exciting times, and a lot of the innovations are going to be driven by data. And more of our world is being run by algorithms that are basically trained and learned upon tons and tons of data. And I don't think that's a technical term, tons.
no, I agree.
I think that's the world we're living in, and this is going to be a show that we will discuss this on a weekly basis with some of the greatest minds and thought leaders in this space. And we're going to try to keep the show to about 45 minutes, which is a fair commute for most people. Sure. If not, it's a good time to listen to while you're coding and kind of thinking of ideas on how to apply data. What do you think, Andy?
Absolutely. I think it's a great idea. I'm so excited that we're doing this, Frank, and I can't wait for folks to hear the guests that we've got lined up for them. So thank you so much for doing this with me, brother.
No, thank you for joining me on this journey, and let's go explore the world of data.
I'm in.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to Data Driven. Don't just listen, become a data driver by going to datadriven.tv to sign up to join the community, access to special events, tips and tricks, and more. Sign up today at datadriven.tv.